Hello, this is Dr. Garret Castleberry, Associate Professor and Program Director of Communication, Media, and Ethics, and I am here to continue a public speaking mini lecture series where we are looking at the fundamentals to help us develop our public speaking skills. Each of us want to grow in important ways. We recognize the significance of public speaking, whether it is in person, in large groups, small groups, or of course, online. And so, as we've talked about in each of these mini lectures, there are crucial steps that we can go through every time to put together a successful speech. And it's important to first back up and review those steps prior to getting into outlining. But we'll try to keep it quick, but serve a healthy recap along the way. So of course, like anything, we always want to start that speech process with brainstorming. Yes, we're coming up with ideas. We're considering where we want to go in the next public speaking journey, right? And sometimes it's pushed to us. It's motivated by the type of speech we're giving, right? A speech about yourself is very different from maybe a how-to speech or some type of well-researched speech, a persuasive speech, and then there are more, what do you call it? Funny types of speeches or speech activities, humorous speech efforts, and so on. And each of these have their own little conventions, right? The little aspects that make them unique, that give them specificity. But we want to start with the directions first, followed by healthy brainstorming. I've talked about brainstorming in previous videos before, but once we finish or round off that brainstorming process, which parts of can continue into the speech making, we want to settle on a topic. We refer to that as topic selection, okay? And once we have a topic selected in mind, we start to refine how we're going to approach that topic. And one of the steps we do through that is research, all right? And in one of the other talks, I have given us important information about types of research and ways we can research to put together the best, most ethically sound and informationally accurate speeches possible, okay? And once we've completed that research phase, once we've gathered up a bunch of research, and just like brainstorming though, let's understand the research phase never necessarily has to end up until the point where you begin preparing, all right? So brainstorming, you can always creatively brainstorm along the way. Research, you can always creatively research along the way. Outlining, as I'll talk about, can be a process that we revise in meaningful ways and intentional ways. But let's get into that. What is an outline? Well, an outline is a strategic organization of your thoughts about the speech, and it's typically it can be in handwritten form, but it's going to be a typed document, something you put together, something you submit, also something you review, you look at. What is the outline? The outline is the organization of our thoughts about the topic. And the reason it should be so connected to the research phase of a speech process is because you're gathering all these materials. You're looking at primary and secondary sources, maybe bringing in personal testimonies, maybe performing an audience analysis or an interview or whatever to gain more information about your topic. And then you want to take all of that pool of resources and information and organize them in an effective manner. This is why in most conventional speeches, we are aiming for a very focused and simplified 3-point speech, right? And when I say a 3-point speech, let me define that. A 3-point speech would, in the middle of the speech, have 3 points. You're trying to make 3 specific and intentional points about that topic, right? Main point number 1, main point number 2, and main point number 3. They would be numbered so in the outline. Under each main point, you would include what we call supporting evidence. And you might consider supporting evidence those bits of research or information that you've gathered about the topic that are reinforcing each main point. And so each main point is kind of like a little sidetrack that takes us in an intentional direction before bringing us back to the conversation as a whole. So a basic speech in a public speaking class is traditionally going to have three main points. Also, it's the rule of threes, people. It's a perfect form for a short informational talk about anything. So a three-point speech. That brings a good point to mind. What are the components of an outline? We've talked about what an outline is, but what does an outline look like? Or at least, how can we create the strongest outline possible? And so here's yet another set of three that we can recognize. All right. So many of you will be familiar with this pattern, perhaps from English composition or other writing classes. All right. So let's think about an outline as another set of threes. First, we have our introduction. Right. An introduction provides that just like any film or book or mediated text, it's bringing the listener into the conversation. It's orienting us in a way that we understand what's about to take place. But before we talk more in depth about introductions, let's round out that three. The second component of a speech is the speech body. All right. Think about the body of an essay, the body of a text, the body of a ship, right, and so on. That core area, and that's where your three main points are going to fall. They're going to fall into the body of the speech. And then third and finally, we have our conclusion. All right. You don't just want to end a speech on a cliffhanger. You want to bring us back around and give us a sense of finality in your speech presentations. And the conclusion provides that. All right. So once again, we have an introduction, a body, and a conclusion to the speech. That should be uniform every time we put together a speech, as well as an outline, which we're focusing on today. Within the speech, we have our speech body in the middle, of which it contains three main points. Main point number 1, 2, 3. And within each of those, you should have some supporting evidence. Usually, perhaps 2, right? 2 is a nice number within, sometimes maybe 1, right? If it's a story or something like that. But we will tend to move away from a lot of storytelling in certain types of, as in place of evidence, I mean. But so let's talk about order for a second, and then I want to refine the elements in a final thought about outlining. All right, so let's talk about order. I've just described the elements of an outline, and it would then make sense that, okay, you've listed 3 things. We understand numerology, right? Counting. So we'll build them one at a time. 1, 2, 3. Intro, body, conclusion. But let me pause there and make a suggestion, right? This is a Castleberry exclusive, although many other people share this philosophy, right? And I don't want to take credit. You could even find such suggestions in various public speaking textbooks. But here is the strongest way you can give yourself that fast track to putting together a successful outline. Start with the body, all right? Just like we use the strategic brainstorming in the research phase to figure out ideas and directions for what we want to talk about within the speech, build the body first, because the body are the points. Or if you don't know the points of the speech, you can't put the other elements together yet. So think about it this way. Start with the body. That's the second unit, the body of the speech. Once it's put together, once you have your main points put together, what does that provide for us? Well, all of a sudden, it's giving us the information that we can use to build the introduction and conclusion. But let's start with the introduction, all right? So you've finished your speech body in outline form. Go back up to the introduction. Let's talk about the elements of introduction, all right? We have our attention getter first, and I can talk about that in more detail in a separate video series, because introductions are quite important. But second, after the introduction, you want that healthy, focused, strategic thesis statement. It should be a single sentence statement. It should be should not be asking a question. It should be a definitive declaration of your intent of that speech. The thesis statement, the most important sentence in a speech. It's the crux of what you want to say. After the thesis statement, while you've got your audience right there on the edge of their seats, give us a healthy preview of main points. What is a preview of main points? It's going over orally what you intend to cover in the speech. And one of the best ways we can develop a preview of main points is to use transitional language, all right? So for example, first, I'm going to talk about the history of blank. Before, second, I look at some causes of that historical event. Before, finally, or third, I look at the effects or ramifications of blank, right? You see how it went? Transitional language in a preview of main points. And then that kind of transition can kind of give us a nice glide into the body of the speech. So you've now put together the two major components of the outline, the body first, then back up to the introduction, and now let's talk about the conclusion. Well, the conclusion actually is the easiest part, because once we've put together the body of the speech, and then we've used the body to inform the introduction of the speech, think of that conclusion as an inverted reversal of the introduction. So your conclusion is going to retrace the steps of the introduction, but in reverse. All right. So lead with a recap. Okay. It's all about recapping in the conclusion. Review your main points. All right. Instead of the way we preview them third in an introduction, review them first. Then reshare your thesis with us, because repetition is important and you want your audience to be reminded of that as close to the end as possible so that they might retain that information. And then finish with an intentional and prepared in advance concluding thought. And this ties into what I want to talk more about with regards to introductions and attention getters specifically, because the best concluding thoughts are going to find a way to bring us back to the beginning, to bring us back to that attention-getting mechanism, that teaser that you open the speech with. And thus, by walking us through each of those steps, you're concluding with an aspect of the speech that brings us all the way back to the top, and it's a very symmetrical process. It's language, it's communication, it's mathematics, right? We're sneaking it in there. But those are steps to creating successful outlines. Look forward to reviewing your outlines, and best of luck as you put those together. Thank you for listening.